My name is Robert Chmielinsky, and I'm one of the organizers of this TEDx Beacon Street event at WGBH. And I'm welcoming Sheila Hemami, an engineer from Draper, and who has spent considerable time recently, in recent years perhaps, in studying the proliferation of microplastic in the environment. Sheila, you just gave a great talk, and we have a bunch of follow-up questions to ask to get a little deeper into the subject so that the audience can understand a little bit more about the problem and about what they can do about it.
Great.
You have talked about the analogy of air quality sensors and how important it is that we're able to measure the volume of microplastics in the oceans and in the environment in order to even start to measure what we can do to mitigate that problem and not add to that problem. And you've talked about how you've worked on developing sensor technology for that. What's the roadmap or the vision for driving down the cost and deploying these so that we can actually start benefiting from being able to conduct these real-time measurements and follow the streams and the flows of microplastics?
So this is an excellent question, and I think it's important to understand our intent is to provide a sensor that effectively will be like a hermetically sealed unit, and it can be deployed on buoys, off of docks, in rivers, on boats, on autonomous vehicles. But it is going to be essentially a unit that doesn't need an operator and that doesn't need assistance in order to make the measurements. So that's the vision for the real-time and autonomous measurement. Now, the rollout plan for this is that we have been in regular communication with many groups around the world who are likely or who are interested in using this technology. The EPA, as I mentioned, is our partner because they are the microplastic sensor experts. But we are in regular communication with, for example, the World Bank Environment and Natural Resources Group to understand what their measurement and monitoring and evaluation needs are around their development projects. Our plan is to open source the sensor and to open source that design in a manner that it can be designed or built at a price point that's going to be operational for the people who need to use it. So you can imagine a menu. There will be a very deluxe sensor at one price point. There will be a slimmed down sensor at another price point. But that menu will be available. And with a pull from organizations that need the measurements, our hope and our plan is that the open source of the design will enable small and large companies and organizations all over the world to build and commercialize these things. Because at Draper, we're a not-for-profit. We don't manufacture things and we don't sell them.
Your answer actually arouses my curiosity even more about the users of the sensors. You're talking about different types, and what are the industries that you see are really interested in knowing about microplastic proliferation in their ecosystem?
So certainly there's a strong interest from watershed groups, environmental advocacy groups, but let's not even think about advocacy. We did a workshop at Draper last fall and invited the watershed groups from the Northeast to come to learn about this challenge and this problem. Groups that are working around rivers, around coastal areas, around specific marshes, they are very concerned, of course, with their water quality and what that imparts onto the environment in the area. So I feel that we have seen a broad range of interest from official environmental organizations. Of course, we engaged on this project at the request of the EPA. I mentioned the World Bank Group, who wants to understand that if they're investing in a development project, and that includes stewardship of the ocean or of the water, that stewardship is happening, and also groups whose mission it is to care for the environment. So I think that's a starting point. Having said that, It wouldn't surprise me if people who have waterfront properties and who just care about the environment want to get a sensor and put it out there, because everybody's will be available to feed information into that open, accessible data portal.
Do you see that there'll be any concern in the marine food production industry? For example, salmon farmers or shrimp farmers, and that they might be concerned about the microplastic content of the environment in which they're raising these food products?
Well, I believe that aquatic farmers are fundamentally concerned about the environment in which they're raising the food products, because they need their product to be healthy so that they can sell it.
At some point, there will be a metric that gets published regarding the conditions of water around different places in the planet. And that could actually become part of a nutrition label at some point, which discloses how many particulates are in a particular food product that I buy.
I think that one takeaway that I've learned from working on this project is that when environmental data is made open and accessible for everyone to see, it forces positive movement around being better stewards of the environment.
What do you see as a timing for the deployment, for the general deployment of these sensors, where we can really start to measure things?
So we have approximately a 1-year very concerted effort to get the next generation of sensor tested and ready for sea trials. So we're hoping to roll it out into the water this time next year.
And then the commercialization, when they actually are being produced in sufficient quantities to fully deploy.
I think that's probably a few years out, but not a very, very large number.
That's great. That's very hopeful news. Some people are going to be concerned about what is the health impact of microplastics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So the health impact on humans is something that there simply hasn't been enough research on. But what I can talk about is a little bit more about what's on those microplastics when they do enter the food web. Many of the persistent organic pollutants that we have banned or that we recognize to be dangerous to human health, such as PCBs, DDT, and flame retardants, these materials are in the open ocean, and they are hydrophobic. They don't like being in water. They are petroleum-based. Plastic is also petroleum-based. So when those chemicals, when those molecules that are floating around in the ocean encounter plastic, they actually latch onto it. Now, if you think about going from a plastic bottle to a lot of microplastic, the surface area has increased tremendously.
Yes.
So all of those microplastic particles are carrying potentially a very high load of this material. And when that microplastic particle enters the food web, it's not just the microplastic, it's also those chemicals that are bound to it and that travel along with it.
And we know that those are quite harmful to health. So it may not be the microplastic itself, but as a carrier, it's a dangerous substance.
We do know that those chemicals have been shown to be harmful to human health. But again, I would like to emphasize that strictly speaking, the health implications of that material as it travels on the microplastic have not been studied yet, because microplastic is very difficult to measure.
Yes, yes. You know, you had a number of calls to action for the consumer, but it seems to be, and we talked a little bit about this already, it seems to be unfair in a way to put the burden of dealing with plastics on the consumer. What's corporate responsibility for this? The corporations that produce the products that contain this packaging, should they share some of the responsibility? How do you see that?
So I think that consumers don't exist in a vacuum. Consumers can only act with regard to what's on the market. And the challenge of our overuse of plastic and our poor shepherding of its disposal is a problem that is so large that there is a role that must be played by a wide variety of sectors, not just the public, but there is a governmental and potentially a regulatory role. There is a role for advocacy groups, there is a role for outreach and public education, and there's a role for industry, because consumers can only make better choices when better choices are available to them in the market.
And today, is there any resource that we can go to in order to evaluate the consistency, the makeup of the packaging that we're being given when we buy products? Do we even know?
I'm not aware of a scoring system for plastic packaging, but it sounds like a good idea. In the absence of that, I think that we can use common sense when we go to the grocery store or to the big box store.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And good luck. We need this work.
Thank you very much
We
for
need these
hosting me.
sensors.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks again. And thank you, audience. You can see Sheila's talk online. It will be posted fairly soon on the TEDxBeaconStreet.com website and also WGBH.com and WGBH.org, pardon me. And you will also see it on YouTube. Thank you very much.